This is the direction to get to Techniques Auto, and we're using TCD. Here we're going past the TCD, and we're going to take a right onto Court Street, which is right here. Dundonald Street and Court Street, and I'm turning onto Dundonald Street. Now we're going to go past the Liberty Theatre or the BIU, and the New Testament Church there on the left. And right at the top of Dundonald Street and King Street, we're going to take a left. And onto King Street, now we turn right onto Curvin Avenue. And this is Techniques Auto. Before I put the piston in, I want to lubricate up the engine, the cylinder. So that's why I put some oil in there. Just getting some of this oil off my hand. So what I'm doing here now, I'm preparing to put in the piston. So I'm turning the crankshaft. So number one is at BDC, because we're starting with number one first. But I'll lubricate the journal. Then I'm rotating back the crankshaft down to BDC. This tool is a piston ring squeezer. Now, back in the day, we put in the piston rings without a squeezer, but this tool just made the job so much easier. And you have many different variations of this tool, but this is the most popular and standard. And what I'm doing now, I'm expanding it so it's larger than the piston. But I don't want it too large. So let's go with number one. I don't want it too large, so it's just enough right there. Good, so it can go over. Because if you expand it too much, whenever you're closing it, it's going to turn the rings out of position, and you don't want them moving out of position. So again, and we're using a lot of lubrication because that's very important for the first startup or while the engine rotating. And before I put the piston ring squeezer on, I'm checking the gap again, just to make sure they are in position. And they are in position. So now I'm going to put the ring squeezer on. but I'm going to hold it in one position, and I'm not going to make it rotate while I'm locking it. So I'm keeping it one position. And then I also leveling it up. See how it turn up there? I want it to stay in a level shape. Once it's up against the piston, then I can lock it up a little bit tighter. So there we go. And sometime I'll use a plastic hammer and just give it a slight little tap, just to make sure it's even. And then I'll lock it again, so it's good. Because if the piston ring's not completely in, you will run into problems. Now, I'm going to take the cap off. Okay, so I'm looking for the arrow pointing to the front of the engine, like that. So I know with the piston like that, then the lip is downward. Now I'm looking for the lip in this, and I want to make sure it's downward also. But before I do that, I'll lubricate the bearing. And this time you really want to keep your hands clean. You don't want any dust going in the bearing. Now I'm going to put the piston in. And the first thing I want to do here is just level up the ring squeezer with the engine block. Then I want to just lock it a little bit, and you hear that one click? That means just from the level. Okay. So I'll just double check it again. Now I'm just going to tap it. Okay, now I'm going to tap it, but I'm also guiding it. And there now I'm going to put the bearing on, but I want to make sure the lip is in the right position. So now I'm just running down the connecting rod cap bolts. Okay. Then I'm going to rotate the engine 360 degrees. Okay, so I've just put in the number 2 piston, tighten the connecting rod bolt a little bit, not too much. And now I'm going to rotate the engine again 360 degrees. And first thing I'm checking for is making sure the crank not locked, and I could see it give me that little movement, so I know it's free. Then I'm going down and I'm checking if the piston go up and down with a consistent feel, meaning it not jamming up one place or feel like something wrong. So both the connecting rod and the piston feel good. And you don't want to rotate it too much at this point, because you know the engine just have a little bit of lubrication. and I'll bring it right back at TDC, so now I can install number 3 piston. And I'll just repeat the process with the other 2 pistons. So now I'm going to rotate the engine and check that final piston that was just installed, and it feels good. There's no jamming and it's rotating good. So at this point I'm going to bring number 1 piston to TDC and we'll leave it there for now. And it's just normal, you bring up number 1 piston to TDC or close to TDC. So TDC is basically, let me go back a little bit. So I'm coming from BDC, coming upwards, and I turning until the piston is at the maximum height it can go, right there. And you can actually feel a slight overlap in the crankshaft, ever so slight. That's the TDC right there. So it's completely at the furthest point it can come up. So now that the piston is installed, we want to just put away a few of the special tools. The rings compressor is one. You don't really want it hanging around when it's not in use. Like this rubber hammer. And just make the bench a little bit lighter. And there's one thing here, if you notice, we're using a piece of wood here just to keep it the engine level. So that's our special tool instead of using an engine stand. And I'm quite comfortable with the engine on the workbench building it. Some guys must have an engine stand. This is fine as long as you balance the engine good and don't put it in a position where it's going to fall off the table if you're trying to rotate it or tighten something. So now I'm going to tighten the connecting rod bolts. So I gotta go back to the specification and get the correct specs. You don't want to guess these measurements. You need to know what them is. Okay, so we just set the top wrench, so we're going to lock it. And you want to stop soon as you hear that click. So I'm just giving it a little bit less. Now I'm going to increase it to the final specs. And there's an important thing here. Each one I torque, I'm going to rotate the engine. And the reason why I'm rotating the engine, just in case one of the journal locked up, we want to make sure which one it is. So now I tighten number 2 and I'm going to rotate the engine again and check it. I'll do a separate video showing you some stuff regarding the oil gauge, using to measure the clearance. That's number 3, so I'm rotating again. Then I'm going to rotate again. And the engine rotating nice. And I'm going to bring it up to number 1. Okay. Okay, so now the piston rings has been changed, the cylinder's been polished. We changed the water jacket, connecting rod bearings, main bearings, and we flushed the engine block and repainted it. So it started to get some shape. It started to have a little beauty about it, and it also have an equal performance about it. Next thing I want you to notice is that how we painted it. We didn't make any paint come in this area, because this need to be perfectly smooth, perfectly level and smooth, with no foreign material or material that's not supposed to be there. And it's the same thing in these areas. We only painted the areas that don't really matter. If it paint, it won't have a problem, any side effect to the engine. And this is our homemade piston holding tool. It get the job done, even though it's homemade. No problem, as long as it get the job done and get it done correctly. You don't need to go and buy some expensive tool all the time. So we'll put this away and we can use it for many more engines. Now I'm going to install the rear crankshaft oil seal and the oil seal housing, which is this. And I also going to install the front cover oil seal, so that we can fit up the rear of the engine. Then we're going to move to fitting up the front of the engine. After that, we'll do the some oil pump and so on. And this is the parts that we're going to install now. That's the rear seal, oil seal, and the front crankshaft oil seal, and the gaskets. Okay, so now I'm just going to use a little silicone on the outside of the seal, and it's mainly just in case, you know, it's an old engine. If there's any unevenness in the seal area, at least there won't be any leakage there, oil leak. And I'm just using a very thin layer of silicone. Very, very thin layer. And this also going to help to lock the seal in position. Some engine, the seal tend to tend to come out after a while. It shrink and the seal will slide out. And this is the old seal here. So if you don't have the correct seal installer, you can use the old seal. And what I'm going to do is just rest the old seal on top of the new seal. So that would give me a perfect fit in the right areas. Then you just use the hammer like that until it's all the way in. Okay, so the new seal is in, and I actually changed the position from the original position. I bring it down but not completely down. And the reason I changed the position, because remember the crankshaft have a slight worn where the old seal was, so we want to use a new surface area on the crankshaft where the seal work. And I'm just removing the excessive silicone. It's not much, but still, you know, we don't want to see any bulky silicone hanging out. So there you go. The new seal is in, and we're going to install it to the engine now. Now the two seals has been installed, and now I'm going to install this, the rear crankshaft oil seal with the housing and the new gasket. And I'm just putting a very thin layer of silicone here. And what this is going to do, it's going to help with any unevenness in the engine block. But you can't put too much silicone, just very, very light. And especially where the gasket going to join into the sump, you always want a little silicone in that area. And it's not a must you have to put silicone here, but it just gives that extra comfort to be sure that there won't be any leakage there. And remember, when I was pulling down the engine, it did have an oil leak right at this gasket. And that was because the gasket shrink. So what I've found with, when you build an engine, if you don't use silicone in some areas, it will seal, but after so many years, the gasket will shrink by the temperature of the engine, and it eventually starts to leak. And you can see in this area of the housing, it's of a slight little pitted. It's not perfect like when it's brand new, and that's why I want to use a very, very thin layer of silicone just to give some extra sealing. So I'm putting on a thin layer of silicone, and it's really thin. This means when I tighten the housing, it won't have a whole lot of silicone bulking out on the inside, because we're trying to avoid that problem also. Then what you want to do here is you want to use just a touch of oil. On the crankshaft where the seal rotates. And you have many different ways to install this. You can use a screwdriver, a sealing starter. But what I do, I just come with the seal and press one side and then slide it over. And it's right over the tool dowel. Here I'm just cutting off the excessive gasket that stick up. You see right there? We gotta take that extra gasket off, but we wanna cut it level with both the cover and the engine block. And we're cutting it outward. Now I'm going to reassemble the front of the engine, the front of the engine block, the timing gear, the tensioners, oil pump, and so on. The first thing I'm going to do is install the new timing chain gear for the crankshaft, the sprocket actually. And this is our old sprocket there. And if you notice how the teeth is sharp like a razor, compared to the new one, which have a flat surface in the top. So that's one of the issues this one will correct, the new one will correct. And then if you notice in here, I'll use the screwdriver. If you notice in here, how the timing chain actually eat down into the outer section of the gear, the inner section of the gear, and notice how here is flat. So those are the reason why I'm changing this timing, this crankshaft sprocket, and using a new one. If you don't have the special tool, all you need to use is a tube socket that fit flush over here, and that slide over the crankshaft, and that will do the job to install it. You don't necessarily have to use a press or anything. And basically we'll just position it like that. The new gear has been installed, and this tube socket done the trick. You don't want to use a new socket. You can, most mechanic always have a old socket in their toolkit that they use for stuff like this. You don't want to destroy a good socket. But you can see the length of the crankshaft here, the distance that the gear got to travel. But the length of the tube socket helps us to clear the outer section of the crankshaft, but just fit in so much on the gear itself. So the tube socket do the trick for the installation. Now I'm going to install the oil pump. And this is basically the heart of the engine. This is what pumping oil through the engine to prevent it from seize and different things. So before we check this pump, this older pump, and it's in good shape. Didn't see anything wrong with it. But being that we're doing so much work to the engine, we just go on the safer side and installing a new pump. And this is the new pump, so now I'm going to install it. So the first thing I want to do is just put the seal on over the pickup, over the pipe. And I'll put a little bit of lubricant on it, just to make it, just a little bit, so the seal go in the pump. Good. And we already primed the pump with some oil in order to make it pick up. So the oil pump has been installed, and now I'm going to put on the oil pump chain and gear. If you like this video, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and recommend it to a friend. And if you're in the neighborhood, feel free to stop by and have a conversation. Or if you just want to send us your question or comment, we will show a reply in our next video. Thanks again for watching.